I'm Michael Spitzer. I'm Professor of Music at the University of Liverpool in the United Kingdom. I've written a book called The Musical Human, A History of Life on Earth.
The universality of music.
One of the surprises is that music is fractal in its nature. It's as fractal as a universe, which is to say that a galaxy has the same shape as a brain cell. The universe exhibits self-similarity at rising orders of magnitude, just as music does. Music is the art of repetition. You have notes in a bar. You have bars repeated in a phrase. You have phrases in a section in a work, and so on ad infinitum. And this is extraordinary because music draws this capacity from the nature of sound or noise itself. If you take a spectrograph of noise, which is a way of representing noise through waveforms, the waveforms exhibit self-similarity however much you focus it. So if you blow up a detail of the waveform, it looks the same. In the same way as a coastline or a cloud is fractal. So the noise of nature, the sound of the wind soughing through the grass or the ripples of water, we enjoy this sound. It's pleasant. It's fractal. And music has the same structure as nature, as natural noise in this respect. And this makes music really perfectly natural. And it's a much more interesting way of regarding the relationship between music and the cosmos than the rather old-fashioned myth of the harmony of the spheres or universal harmony. So the ancients, the Greeks and the Chinese and the Sumerians believed that music mirrors the cosmos because it represents the same harmonic proportions which you see in the intervals. So fifths and octaves and fourths, the acoustic ratios are natural in that respect. So Copernicus thought that the planets orbited in musical proportions. That's the old-fashioned view of music's universality. I think the fractal theory is much more interesting, and it plugs in much more dramatically into the latest findings in astronomy and in the analysis of musical structure. Now, once you widen the lens as widely as possible and you see the big picture of where sapient music comes from, the cosmic joke, the irony is that humans aren't very musical at all compared to how naturally musical birds and whales are. And we know this because we evolved along the ape line, and apes, compared to birds, are not musical. How can I say that? Birds have vocal learning. They can creatively learn new songs. Apes can't do that. They are confined to the calls they're born with. Insects can pulse together in rhythm. They have a sense of rhythm. Some birds have a sense of rhythm, and apes don't have that. So it's very odd that humans evolved from apes who were not musical, but humans evolved music again from the ground up, from scratch. So humans are the great synthesizers. I think it's a reason why, although human music is innate and universal, it's also learned. And there's also a reason why humans have always been haunted by a nostalgia for bird songs. We hear birds in the trees, and this gives us a sense of inadequacy because bird song is natural and human music is not. What humans brought to the table is that we're the great synthesizers. We put together the rhythms of insects, the melody of birds, the gestural sessiality of apes. We also reflect the fractal structure of the cosmos, but what we brought to it was the very human drives of emotions, and indeed the finite quality of human life. That the fact that we die, I think, haunts us, and the idea of a limit is one of the horizons or boundary conditions of human music. So whilst the elements of music might still be there in the future once humans are gone, so fractal structure and the hierarchical quality of musical structure, without human emotions or the finitude of the human lifespan, it wouldn't be what I call music. So when NASA sent the Golden Record aboard Voyager 40 years ago, this suggested a very interesting thought experiment, because NASA stocked the record with diverse examples of human music. For instance, a Bach Brandenburg Concerto, Chuck Berry's Johnny Be Good, panpipes from the Solomon Islands, court music, gamelan from Java. If we imagine aliens open this in 1 billion years, will they be able to extrapolate some common denominator, something fundamentally human from this assortment of Earth music? And this begs the question, what do they have in common? Now, I think what they do have in common, even for an alien, is that sapiens are flatlanders. We inhabit a very narrow band of perceptual space. We can't hear as low as whales. We can't hear as high as bats. Our songs aren't as long as whale songs, which can be 23 hours long. They aren't as fast as a pipistrelle bat song, which can be as short as a single wing beat. What they will see, though, is a lot of commonality between sapiens music and animal music. Both are hierarchical, as to say that we repeat at rising levels, as do birds and whales. And that might strike aliens as interesting, and they might say, well, actually, this is not so different from animal music. But they will recognize sapiens for perhaps having this walking meter, which goes back to Australopithecines 4 million years ago, that we have a rhythm of walking, whereas whales have a much more fluid rhythm of floating through their own medium, just as birdsong is as jerky as the motions of a bird. So each species, bird, whale, and sapiens, reflects the kind of motion that their bodies pursue in their environments. I think that'll be apparent to aliens. So the question of, is music a universal language, is an interesting one, because on the surface, every culture in the world, though it values music, has different kinds of scales and harmonies. But you can say that there is a music instinct, that we're all born for a capacity for music, expressed through an ability, which is innate, to recognize rhythm, to beat in time to rhythm, to recognize melody, to recall a melody. So this universality then changes. The second that culture gets its hooks into a child, it actually matters whether you bounce your baby in rhythms of 2 or 3 beats. It'll determine the kind of rhythm the baby will grow up to enjoy. It matters to the baby the kind of melodies you sing to the child. Babies born in the West prefer certain kind of tuning systems to those born in, say, Indonesia. Another aspect of this universality is that we all share a vocabulary of basic emotions, sadness, happiness, anger, fear, and so on. And you could say that this goes to the structure of the human brain, which is layered. So the cultural specificity of the brain is due to the neocortex, the most evolved, the most advanced part, which is occupied with learning patterns and experiences. The deeper you dive into the human brain, the more universal one's propensity for music and for emotion goes. If you start with the brainstem, our oldest layer, this is what the simplest organisms have. Brainstems flinch to reflexes in sound, so shocks and loud bangs will trigger the brainstem reflex. The next layer up, the basal ganglia, responds to pleasure, whether a sound is pleasant or unpleasant. This is a reptilian brain. The mammalian brain, the amygdala, is where emotions happen: sadness, happiness, anger, fear. And the most modern layer, the neocortex, is the point where you process patterns and the complexities of music. So as a rule, the deeper you dive into the brain, the more universal music is. So one of the interesting facts about Sapiens, that everywhere Sapiens travels in the world, he takes music with them. So when Cortez goes to South America, to Mexico, he brings Spanish counterpoint. When the English go to North America, they bring Puritan hymn tunes. When the Victorian missionary Christians go to Africa, they again bring Christian hymn tunes, which is why most African national anthems sound like Christian hymn tunes. Going back to the Silk Road, everywhere that people take their caravans laden with spices or with food, they bring instruments like lutes or violins. They also bring melodies. And if you watch what happens to the violin and the lute, which were invented in Central Asia, they travel to China, they travel to Japan, they travel to India, they travel to the Middle East. They eventually travel to Germany and Spain and through there into Central Europe. And everywhere the lute goes, it will change its name. If you look at Lisbon in 1520, 10% of the population of Lisbon was African. And the Africans brought African dances such as chacons and sarabands, which will eventually find their way into Johann Sebastian Bach's dance music. So there's even an African cargo in a German composer's Baroque compositions. Because once music, or just like cricket, is enculturated by another people, it becomes naturalized. And I mean, who is to say that once the Aztec Indians have absorbed the Spanish counterpoint, it's no longer Indian. It becomes Indianized. In a similar way to, even more dramatically, that Japan has a tradition where every New Year's Eve they perform Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. And in Japanese eyes, this may sound incredible, Beethoven is a Japanese composer. Why is that? Beethoven, but also Mozart and Schubert, resonates with a Japanese sensibility for etiquette or for formality and respect for tradition. So what Japan is getting from Beethoven isn't necessarily the same thing that we're getting from Beethoven. So Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, which for us is very individualistic, for Japanese culture is expressing the opposite ethos of social togetherness and an extinction of the ego. It's a much more Zen quality. Major difference between the West and, shall we say, the East is that the West has a problem with nature, or sonic nature being the sound of the trees or the wind, and we conceptually distinguish notes from sounds. If you look at an image of Confucius, the great Chinese sage, he's typically portrayed playing a zither called a qin in Chinese. It's a flat harp. And Confucius plays this under an apricot tree. And there was a tradition of viewing the very delicate sounds of the zither, of the qin, as melding into the sounds of the wind and the bamboo and the grass and the water. There was no distinction between music and nature. It's more natural, you could say, and the West is, by the same token, rather unnatural. And this goes right back as far as you'd like to go. So one of the great monuments of Chinese civilization are the Marquis Yi of Zen bells, discovered in 1978. Who was the Marquis Yi of Zen? He was a warlord who died in 433 BC. And his tomb contained an extraordinary thing, 65 bronze bells. And what these bells show is that more than 2,000 years ago, Chinese acoustic science was infinitely superior to Western acoustics. The kind of acoustic partials that a bell generates are so complex they can't be captured arithmetically, which is why we don't have bells in Western music. We exile bells to church towers. Only the Chinese worked out how to play bells. They understood sound, understood sonority, and this sensibility for natural sound, it permeates all of Chinese and Japanese music, and the West has lost that. Western music was one of many civilizations, and if anything, it was on the back foot compared to the more advanced musical cultures happening in China, in India, in the Middle East. And then what happens next through globalization is the takeover of the planet because of music notation. Now, what goes round comes round. And what we see now is that the West is being colonized by two tidal waves flowing across the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. African music, jazz and rock has become the lingua franca of Western music in America and Europe. In a similar way, the most popular band in the world is BTS, K-pop. And the West is re-educated about sound. We in the West have tended to have a misconception that history of music is a history of works or compositions and a history of composers, people who wrote these works. This tends to reduce music into an object, into an exhibit in an imaginary museum. It also overvalues the role of a composer compared to most people who are innately musical. So in some ways, you need to take music away from the musicians and give it back to the people. The West has a misconception that music is in the hands of geniuses who receive their inspiration from a divine authority. And then when God dies, as it were, in the 19th century, they turn the composer themselves into a divine figure with divine authority. This authority extends to every note enshrined in the score. And this limits the role of a performer into simply reproducing what the great Bach or the great Beethoven in their divine wisdom legislates. Actually, because of that, we can have a pretty good idea of exactly how a Beethoven sonata would have sounded in 1800. Such was the authority of this divine figure. But the more you get away from the authority of the composer, when you drift eastwards or southwards in world history, the less you can be sure about what the composer would have wanted a few centuries ago. What makes human music so distinctive is our link between sound and motion, which is due to the connections in the human brain between the motor regions controlling our motion and the regions controlling hearing and sound, the auditory cortex. Birds, as a rule, don't have that link, with the possible exception of sulfur-crested cockatoos. So as long as you want to go back, there is this link between rhythm and motion. If you rock a baby to a particular rhythm, that baby will come to like that particular rhythm. We also love to imitate rhythm, and that's due to the existence of mirror neurons in our brains. So when the brain sees an action, a physical action in somebody else, you don't have to move to experience that motion in your brain because the mirror neurons are responding sympathetically. We've always had an instinctive faculty to imitate. We call it mimesis. And we see that in all walks of life. Yawns are contagious. If I see you yawning, I yawn back. But also emotions are contagious. If you're sad, I instinctively cleave to your sadness. I mirror it. I emote with you. And that's the same with music. When I feel sad, when I hear a sad song, my body, my mirror neurons are instinctively sympathizing. I'm mimicking. I'm mirroring the human sadness encoded in that sad song. Another vivid example of emotional contagion which is related to our mirror neurons vibrating sympathetically to the perception of somebody else moving. I once attended a concert and with my infant toddler, and there were 1,000 toddlers all jumping up and down instinctively to the sound of the orchestra playing the Lone Ranger. Now, they'd never heard the Lone Ranger before. It's the William Tell overture by Rossini. But they had an instinctive response to that rhythm, and we're born for that. And even when you do an experiment on babies who aren't sitting on their parents' knees, so you could perhaps argue that it's the parents who are prompting their children to jump up and down, they do the same thing. So it's within the baby, not within the adult. There's an extreme reaction to music which has been called the chills or frisson or the sublime. There are moments in music which are so intense, and they're often triggered by breakthrough moments of loudness or extremity. They're different for every person. It's interesting because you have the same parts of the brain which respond to that as response to fear, which is why the chills give you goosebumps or piloerection. The hairs on your skin literally stand on end, like when you're getting goosebumps. But you enjoy this fear, and this is very strange. One of the definitions of musical aesthetics is that you learn to take the danger out of extreme experience. And we have a similar experience when we go on a fairground ride or when we're watching a volcanic eruption in the safety of an observation platform. It's almost as if music is a violence without the danger, or the natural infinite, the natural sublime without the danger. Darwin was the first to observe that emotion had an adaptive role in the field, that animals and people, they experience emotions in relation to goals which help them survive. So happiness is when you achieve a goal, anger is when the goal is blocked, sadness is when you lose a loved one. Fear is the most archetypal emotion. When you're exposed to a threat from a snake, you have an instinctive response to either freeze or to fight or to flee. And music is full of similar responses. Music is made of patterns, and patterns can either be allowed to run their course or they can be frustrated through shocks. And when we hear a shock in music, it can be a bang or the interruption of a pattern. That engages the same faculties in our brain as danger out in the field. But of course, nobody dies in music. This is only a derived effect of that. But this is why we think that music is able to express emotion in a very visceral way. And emotions are also processed at different levels of the brain, starting with the brainstem, which flinches to shocks, and then the reptile brain, the basal ganglia, responds to pleasure or displeasure. The mammalian amygdala responds to emotions, happiness, sadness, and the neocortex processes emotions through pattern. So when you're listening to music, it's a kind of mental time travel. You really are, when you're absorbed in a work, you're traveling back through layer upon layer of your brain, almost biologically, which is why I call music a sort of umbilical cord back to Mother Nature. It's mental time travel. The astonishing fact is musical training rewires the brain. Most of us are right-brained. If we train a musician, they become left-brain. They hear music through the same temporal lobe which processes language, which makes sense because complex music is as complex as language. And there are so many skills which fall out of the discipline of learning to play an instrument. You learn discipline. You learn how to practice, how to organize your time. You learn how to work together in a team. To play in an orchestra is team building. You learn how to pay attention. You learn how to focus on sounds. These are all highly transferable skills. Appreciating music purely as a form of relaxation or entertainment does a massive disservice to all the things that music helps you with. Let's list them. Music can bring people together. The biggest draw to mental health is loneliness. You don't have to actively make music with somebody else. Just to listen to music plugs you into a social network, because every note of music is social. It's formed of social conventions. Music lowers stress by reducing cortisol. It gives you pleasure, makes you happy by flooding the brain with neurotransmitters like dopamine. Music is an excellent way of tagging memories, remembering the past. Music is a fantastic way of expressing your deepest emotions and your identity, which can't be captured by language. Why is that? Because music is far too precise for words to capture what's going on. And there's a reason why teenagers, imprint their taste in music with songs they learn at that time, because music has always come to define identity of who you are. All these things, increase your mental health, and ultimately, music becomes a mode of mindfulness, of contemplation. It's not purely relaxing because there's too much going on when you're listening, and the word relaxation gives a sense of passivity, whereas to listen is a very active and creative activity. Music, of course, can also harm the brain. It can be militarized, as we know from examples of Guantanamo Bay, when the army plays certain kinds of music to inmates. As a rule, any sound you dislike can harm you. So I may be into metal, but you might not be. So if I play metal very loudly, that will increase your stress levels. And similarly, much as we know about the health benefits of music, you have to be extremely cautious in how you prescribe it clinically. So, for instance, Alzheimer's patients don't do well listening to Baroque music. It's too repetitive for them. And certain conditions respond better to softer music or to music with greater variety. If you're suffering from depression, then you don't want to hear a kind of music which reinforces that condition. So it's fine to argue for music to be a prescribed drug, but you have to educate the doctors in the kinds of music to prescribe.
Want to support the channel? Join the Big Think members community where you get access to videos early, ad-free.